It was a quiet, snow-covered Christmas Eve in the sleepy town of Willowbrook. Most homes glowed warmly from within, wrapped in the gentle light of festive decorations, while the streets lay still and silent, blanketed by fresh, untouched snow. In one cozy little house at the end of Maple Lane, an elderly woman named Mrs. Evelyn Carter sat alone by her window, watching the world outside. She hadn't expected any visitors. Most of her family had drifted away over the years, either busy with their own lives or too far away to make the journey. She had long ago accepted the loneliness that sometimes came with growing older. Tonight, though, she felt it more keenly than usual. She had decorated a little tree and lit a few candles, hoping the holiday spirit would bring her some comfort. But as she stared into the empty street, she couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that had settled in her heart. Suddenly, a soft, hesitant knock echoed from her front door, snapping her out of her thoughts. Evelyn blinked, her mind racing. Who could it be at this hour? She slowly got up, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and made her way to the door, a hint of curiosity mixed with a touch of apprehension. She unlocked the door and opened it, letting the cold, crisp night air rush in. Standing on her doorstep was a little girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, bundled up in a bright red coat that seemed 2 sizes too big. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her big eyes sparkled in the dim light spilling from Evelyn's doorway. In her gloved hands she clutched a small worn bag, and her gaze held a mix of hope and worry. "Hello, dear," Evelyn said softly, bending down a little to meet the girl's eyes. "Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The girl looked down, shuffling her feet in the snow, then lifted her eyes to Evelyn's, revealing a mix of emotions Evelyn couldn't quite place. "I am sorry to bother you," the girl said in a small voice, "but I didn't know where else to go. My mom, she told me to find you." "Your mother told you to find me?" Evelyn repeated, puzzled. She hadn't heard of any children living nearby, and she certainly didn't know anyone with a young daughter. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated, then whispered, "I'm Lily." Evelyn gave her a warm, reassuring smile, despite the growing confusion in her mind. "Well, Lily, it's awfully cold out here. Why don't you come inside and warm up for a bit?" The little girl nodded, stepping carefully over the threshold, her small boots leaving faint, wet marks on the doormat. Evelyn led her into the living room, where the fire crackled softly in the fireplace. She noticed that Lily seemed to hold her bag protectively close, almost like she was afraid of losing it. As they sat down, Evelyn couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unease. The child's unexpected appearance was odd enough, but there was something more, something about her that tugged at a distant memory, just out of reach. "Lily, do you live around here?" Evelyn asked gently, handing the girl a warm blanket and a mug of cocoa she quickly prepared. Lily shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. "No, I came a long way." Evelyn frowned, puzzled. "How did you get here, honey? Did someone bring you?" Lily hesitated, glancing down at her cocoa, as if gathering her thoughts. "My mom, she couldn't come with me, but she said you'd help me." The child's words stirred something deep within Evelyn, and she felt her heart tighten with a strange, unexplainable fear. She didn't know why, but there was a hint of desperation in Lily's voice that she couldn't ignore. She leaned forward, taking the girl's small, cold hands in hers. "Lily, tell me, why did your mother send you to me?" For a moment, Lily's face crumpled, a brave little facade breaking, and her eyes filled with tears. She took a shaky breath, looking down at her small, trembling hands. She told me that you'd understand. She said I needed to find you because..." Lily trailed off, her voice breaking, her gaze now focused on Evelyn's midsection. Evelyn's confusion deepened as she followed Lily's gaze, glancing down at herself. She didn't understand what the girl was looking at. "Lily, dear, why are you staring at me like that?" Lily's little hand reached out slowly, as if seeking permission, and gently rested on Evelyn's belly. "My mom said you were like me once. She said you'd know what to do." Evelyn's breath caught, and she felt a sudden, sharp pang in her chest. a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Memories she thought she'd buried long ago began to stir, bringing with them a flood of emotions she wasn't ready to face. She didn't know what this child was talking about, but something told her that this was an ordinary Christmas Eve visit. "Lily, what do you mean?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper now, her heart racing as she looked into the girl's earnest, pleading eyes. The little girl took a deep, shaky breath, as if trying to summon all her courage. "My mom, she told me that I had a sister she had to let go a long time ago, and she said that sister was you." The words hung in the air, filling the room with a weight that Evelyn could barely comprehend. She felt the ground shift beneath her, and everything she'd ever known suddenly seemed fragile, uncertain. Evelyn felt her breath catch in her chest. She stared at the little girl in disbelief, her mind struggling to process the words she'd just heard. The world seemed to tilt, and for a moment she wasn't sure if she was standing on solid ground. The warmth from the fire, the coziness of her living room, even the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall, all of it faded into a distant hum. All she could see, all she could focus on, was the little girl sitting across from her, clutching her hands with that fierce, determined look in her eyes. "Sister," Evelyn whispered, almost to herself. The word felt foreign, as if it didn't belong to her anymore. She had long ago come to terms with the family she'd had, and the family she hadn't. In her youth, she'd known that she had been adopted, but her adoptive parents had never spoken much about her origins, and she hadn't pressed them. It had always felt too complicated, too painful to dig into, and she'd lived her life without looking back. But now, here was this child, this strange, vulnerable child, claiming a connection Evelyn hadn't known existed. Evelyn gently let go of Lily's hands and took a steadying breath, trying to keep her voice calm, even though her heart was racing. "Lily," she said softly, "what do you mean by that? I don't understand. Who is your mother?" Lily hesitated, her small face tightening with a mixture of sorrow and hope. She pulled her bag closer to her, as if searching for something that would explain everything better than words. Finally, she looked up and met Evelyn's gaze, her expression resolute. "My mom said her name was Amelia," Lily whispered, "and that you might remember her. She told me stories about you. She told me that she always hoped she'd find you again, but she never did." Amelia. The name hit Evelyn like a wave, stirring memories buried so deeply she'd almost forgotten them. Amelia had been her mother's name, her birth mother's name. She remembered it only vaguely from fleeting, whispered conversations she'd overheard as a child. Her adoptive parents hadn't known much about Amelia, only that she had been a young woman facing difficult circumstances, forced to make an impossible choice. But Evelyn hadn't ever thought of her as a real person with a life, a story. She'd always just been a distant name, a shadow of someone who had given her up. Suddenly, Evelyn was gripped by a strange mixture of longing and sorrow, feelings she couldn't quite make sense of. She had always wondered quietly, in the far recesses of her heart, what her birth mother might have been like, but she told herself it was a part of her life that would remain unanswered. Now, here was this little girl, claiming to know her, to hold a piece of her family's history, something Evelyn had never dared to hope for. "Lily," Evelyn said, her voice barely steady, How did you find me? How did you come here?" Lily looked down, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her worn bag. "Mom used to talk about you sometimes," she said softly. "She'd tell me about her sister, and she always said you'd be someone who would understand, that you'd be kind. When she got sick, she told me that if anything ever happened, I should try to find you. She gave me a picture of you. It's old, but she said it was all she had. I didn't know if you'd still be here, but I had to try." Evelyn felt her heart twist painfully at the child's words. She couldn't imagine the journey Lily must have taken to get here, the courage it must have taken to come all this way. She thought about the child's mother, Amelia, her sister, a woman she'd never truly known. A woman who, even as her life unraveled, had clung to the hope that somehow, one day, her daughter might find her family. The thought was overwhelming, a tangled mix of grief and wonder, and Evelyn struggled to find words. As if sensing her thoughts, Lily reached into her bag and pulled out a small, faded photograph. She held it out with both hands, and Evelyn took it, her fingers trembling as she looked at the image. The photograph was worn and yellowed, the edges frayed from years of handling, but she could still make out two young girls, maybe no older than 5 or 6, standing together in a sunlit field, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. "That's you," Lily said quietly, pointing to the younger of the two girls in the picture. "Mom said this was taken when you were both little, before everything changed." Evelyn studied the photo, her eyes tracing the faces of the two children in it, both carefree and happy. She could see herself in the younger girl's eyes in her shy smile. But the other child, Amelia, looked bolder, with a mischievous grin and a spark of laughter in her eyes that Evelyn felt in her heart. This was the sister she had never known, the sister who had been a stranger to her all her life. Evelyn felt tears welling up, her mind spinning with questions and regrets. How much had she missed? What had happened to Amelia, and why had they been separated? She wished, with a fierce ache, that she had some way to reach back through time, to change things, to find Amelia and hold her close. But all she had was this photograph and the little girl sitting before her, carrying the weight of a past Evelyn hadn't even known existed. After a long moment, Evelyn looked up, her voice trembling. "Lily," she said softly, "I don't know what to say. I didn't know about Amelia. I didn't know I had a sister. I've lived my whole life without knowing." Lily's small face softened, and she gave Evelyn a tiny, understanding nod. "Mom told me that you didn't know. She always said that it wasn't your fault, that you never had a choice in any of it. But she hoped that one day you'd know the truth." Evelyn reached out, pulling Lily into a gentle hug, feeling the warmth of the child in her arms, the strange sense of connection and belonging she hadn't felt in years. It was as if, in that small embrace, a part of her heart she had thought was closed off forever had opened again. She held Lily close, feeling the weight of everything she'd lost, and everything she'd found all at once. After a long silent moment, Evelyn gently pulled back, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "Lily, I want to hear everything. Everything you can tell me about your mother, about my sister." Lily looked up, her eyes wide and sullen. "I can tell you some things, but Mom made me promise not to tell everything all at once. She said you'd need time to understand, that it might be too much to hear all at once." Evelyn's heart raced, curiosity and fear mixing together in her chest. Too much to hear. What did she mean by that? Lily hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor, as if debating whether to say more. "I don't know everything," she whispered. "But Mom told me that some things, they're harder to believe. She told me I'd have to be patient. That you'd need time to believe in something that might feel impossible." Evelyn felt a chill, a sense that something deeper and more mysterious was at play. She reached for Lily's hand, squeezing it gently. "I'll listen, Lily. Whatever it is, whatever you have to tell me, I'll listen." Lily nodded, giving her a small, hopeful smile, but her expression held a hint of sadness that Evelyn couldn't quite understand. In the glow of the firelight, Evelyn saw a flicker of something in the child's eyes, a look that seemed far beyond her years, as if she carried secrets even she didn't fully understand. Evelyn held her breath, waiting, knowing that whatever came next would change her life forever. As Evelyn sat with Lily in the quiet warmth of her living room, she felt a strange pull, a sense that her world had opened up into something vast and unknowable. Here she was, sitting with her sister's daughter, a niece she hadn't known existed until this night. Yet, in Lily's eyes she could see reflections of herself, her own quiet strength, her vulnerability, her unspoken longing. Evelyn's mind spun with questions, but she sensed that pushing too hard might make Lily retreat, or worse, might break whatever fragile connection they had begun to build. For a few minutes they sat in silence, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Evelyn noticed that Lily's gaze kept drifting to the window, as if she were watching for something. or someone. It made Evelyn feel a strange chill, as though there was something lurking just outside her understanding. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had led Lily here was part of a larger story, one that her sister Amelia hadn't been able to share in her lifetime. "Lily," Evelyn said gently, "if your mother couldn't come with you, does that mean she's no longer with us?" She could hardly bring herself to ask, her voice trembling on the last words. It felt strange to say it out loud, as if voicing it would make the answer harder to bear. Lily's face fell, and she nodded slowly, her small hands fidgeting with the edges of her coat. She got sick a few years ago. She fought really hard. But in the end, she knew she didn't have much time left. That's when she started talking to me about you. Lily's voice was soft, filled with a grief that seemed far too deep for a child her age. She made me promise to find you, no matter what. Evelyn felt her heart break at the thought of her sister suffering alone, carrying the knowledge of a family she could never reach. She wished she could turn back time, that she could have been there for Amelia, that she could have done something, anything, to keep her from facing those last days alone. But she also felt something else, a nagging question in the back of her mind. Why now? Why had Amelia waited until the end to tell Lily about her family, about Evelyn? There had to be more to this story. "Did she ever tell you why we were separated?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lily hesitated, biting her lip, and Evelyn could see that she was struggling with something. "She said that you were both really young when it happened," Lily began, her voice wavering, "and that it wasn't her choice. She wanted to keep you close, but things happened. People got involved." "People?" Evelyn repeated, frowning. She felt a pang of unease, a sensation like pieces of a puzzle starting to shift, but not quite coming together. Lily nodded slowly. "She didn't talk about it much, but she told me that she was sent away, and that when she tried to come back, it was too late. They'd already placed you with a family. She said it was the hardest thing she ever had to live with." Evelyn felt a wave of sadness wash over her. She could hardly imagine how lonely and lost Amelia must have felt, separated from her family, from her little sister. The thought haunted her, filling her with a sense of sorrow that felt like it had been waiting for years to surface. Yet, at the same time, she felt anger, a silent, burning anger at whoever had forced Amelia away, who had kept them apart. But as much as she wanted answers, there was something about Lily's presence, her quiet resilience, that kept Evelyn grounded, reminding her that the past, however painful, could not be changed. But the unease in Lily's eyes kept pulling at her, making her wonder if there was something more. Evelyn noticed that Lily's gaze kept shifting back to her bag, as if there was something inside that weighed on her as heavily as her words. "Lily," Evelyn said softly, reaching out and touching her hand, "is there something else your mother wanted you to share with me?" Lily's eyes widened a little, her small hand freezing under Evelyn's touch. She looked away, staring into the fire for a moment, as if gathering her courage. "Mom, she wanted me to give you this," she said finally, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small, faded notebook. The cover was worn, the edges fraying, and the pages looked like they'd been handled 100 times. Evelyn took the notebook with gentle hands, her heart pounding as she opened it to the first page. In careful, looping handwriting, she saw Amelia's name, followed by a date that was over 3 decades old. It was a journal, Amelia's journal. She felt a strange thrill mixed with apprehension, as if she were about to peek into a part of her sister's life that had been hidden for so long. Lily watched her, her eyes filled with an unspoken question. "Mom said, she said it would help you understand, that it would tell you why she never came back." Evelyn nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the journal in her hands. She glanced back at Lily, sensing that there was more to the story than what the child had told her. She had the feeling that Amelia's life had been far more complicated than she could have ever guessed, that whatever had kept them apart wasn't just a matter of circumstance, but something deeper, perhaps even darker. As she turned the first few pages, she could feel Amelia's voice come alive in the words, each line capturing fragments of her life, her struggles, her dreams. There were entries about their childhood, Memories of simpler days when they were just two girls dreaming of the future. But as she read on, the entries grew more troubled, the words sharper, as if Amelia had been wrestling with something she couldn't quite put into words. One entry, in particular, caught Evelyn's attention. Amelia had written about a place, a strange, cold building on the outskirts of town where she'd been sent after their parents had passed away. She mentioned people in suits, stern faces, voices that didn't hold warmth, only duty. She wrote about how they had told her that her sister would be better off in a stable home, how they had convinced her that it was for the best, that she had no choice. Evelyn's hands trembled as she read. The words paint a picture of a young girl, alone, desperate, but with no one to turn to. She could almost feel Amelia's despair, a sense of powerlessness. The entries hinted at things Evelyn didn't understand. Vague mentions of promises broken, of things taken from her, of people who had come into her life and left scars that went deeper than anyone could see. But one entry at the very end of the journal sent a chill through Evelyn's heart. They told me I was unfit, that I didn't deserve to be with her, to watch her grow up. I was just a kid myself. But I tried. I tried so hard to get back to her, to find a way to make things right. They made me leave, and by the time I came back, she was gone. They took her from me, and I'll never forgive them for that. Evelyn felt tears slipping down her cheeks as she closed the journal, her heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and rage. She couldn't believe the cruelty her sister had endured, the separation forced upon them by people who had no right to decide their fate. But in the midst of her anger, she felt a deep determination rise within her. A fierce resolve to understand everything, to piece together the life Amelia had lived, to make sense of the story that had been kept from her for so long. "Lily," she said quietly, her voice trembling with a new resolve, "I don't know who those people were or why they did this, but I promise you we're going to find out. Together." Lily's face softened, a small, hopeful smile breaking through her sorrow. She nodded, and Evelyn could see that despite her young age, she carried her mother's resilience, her strength. It was as if Amelia had passed on her determination to her daughter, a legacy of courage in the face of hardship. But as Evelyn sat there, holding the journal and looking at Lily, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were only at the beginning of a much deeper mystery, a mystery that stretched beyond her understanding, and into shadows of the past that had yet to come to light. Evelyn clutched Amelia's journal close to her chest, the words echoing through her mind like whispers from the past. Every page, every line, felt like a window into her sister's life, a life filled with pain and struggle that Evelyn had never known. But what struck her the most was a sense of injustice, of something twisted and wrong lurking in their family's history. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone had wanted to keep them apart, and that someone had succeeded, leaving Amelia to suffer alone. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the walls, but Evelyn felt no warmth. The room seemed to close in around her, filled with the weight of secrets and memories that had lain buried for so long. She looked over at Lily, who had curled up on the couch, her small frame nearly disappearing under a blanket. The child looked exhausted, her eyes heavy with a sadness far too deep for her years. And yet there was a determination in her gaze, a strength that reminded Evelyn of Amelia's words in the journal, a legacy of courage, even in the face of unimaginable loss. "Lily," Evelyn began gently, trying to keep her voice steady, "when you said that your mother wanted you to find me, did she tell you anything else? Anything that might help us understand who did this to her?" Lily's eyes flickered with something like fear, and she looked away, her fingers fidgeting with the edges of the blanket. "Mom said, she said there were people who didn't want her to find you. She told me that if I came here, I had to be careful. That there were things people didn't want me to know." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. The idea that someone might still be watching, that someone might still care about keeping their story hidden, was terrifying. But even as fear rose within her, Evelyn felt a fierce protectiveness. She was done letting others control her life, done letting secrets keep her from the family she'd been robbed of. She reached out, taking Lily's hand in her own, feeling the strength and warmth in the child's grip. "Lily, I'm not afraid, she said firmly. Whatever it is, whatever they don't want us to know, we're going to find out. I promise. But even as she spoke the words, she felt the weight of them settle heavily around her. She knew that delving into the past could bring danger, could uncover things she wasn't ready to face. And yet, the thought of giving up, of letting Amelia's story go untold, was unthinkable. She owed it to her sister, to Lily, to herself, to find the truth. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, Evelyn sat by the fire, flipping through the pages of Amelia's journal, searching for clues, for any hint of who might have been behind their separation. One particular entry caught her eye, written in rushed, shaky handwriting, as if Amelia had been terrified while she wrote it. Today, I saw them again. The man in the grey coat and the woman with the cold eyes. They were watching me from across the street. I don't know who they are, but I feel like they're following me, like they're waiting for me to make a mistake. I have to be careful. They've already taken everything from me. I can't let them find her. Not again. Evelyn's heart raced as she read the words, her mind filling with questions. Who were these people? Why would they be following her sister, watching her like that? She tried to remember if she'd ever noticed anyone strange in her own life, anyone who seemed out of place. But her memories offered no answers, only a feeling of dread that grew stronger with each passing moment. The next morning, Evelyn decided to take action. She knew that the answers they needed wouldn't be found in her cozy little house. They would have to retrace Amelia's steps, to visit the places she had been, to find the people who might remember her. She woke Lily gently, explaining her plan, watching as the child's eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Are you sure? Lily asked, her voice small but steady. What if they don't want us to find out? Evelyn felt a surge of determination. I don't care what they want, she replied firmly. They've kept us apart for too long. It's time we took our story back. Together, they set out on a journey that led them through the forgotten corners of Willowbrook, to the places where Amelia had once lived, once struggled, trying to build a life in the shadow of a past she could never escape. They visited old neighbors who remembered Amelia as a quiet, serious young woman with sad eyes and a fierce protectiveness for her sister. They spoke to old shopkeepers who recalled seeing her, always looking over her shoulder, as if she were hiding from something no one else could see. As they pieced together the fragments of Amelia's life, Evelyn felt her anger grow, an anger tempered only by the love she felt for her sister, a love she had only just begun to understand. But with each new piece of information, a pattern began to emerge, a pattern of people, of strangers who had entered Amelia's life at the most vulnerable times, only to vanish when she needed help the most. One afternoon, as they were leaving a small diner where an elderly waitress had remembered Amelia from years ago, Evelyn noticed a figure standing across the street, watching them. The man wore a grey coat, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses, his expression unreadable. Evelyn's heart pounded, a cold wave of fear washing over her. She could feel Lily tense beside her, her small hand gripping Evelyn's tightly. Is that? Lily whispered, her voice filled with a fear that mirrored Evelyn's own. Evelyn nodded, her pulse racing. I think it might be, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. She forced herself to look away, to act as if she hadn't noticed him. But every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect Lily, to get them both as far away from that man as possible. But even as they walked quickly down the street, Evelyn felt the weight of his gaze following them, watching their every move. She knew, deep down, that they couldn't run forever, that the only way to end this was to confront it, to face the shadows that had haunted their family for so long. That night, as they sat in a small motel room, Evelyn and Lily huddled together, talking in hushed whispers. Evelyn tried to reassure Lily, trying to convince her that they were safe, but she could see the fear in the child's eyes, the uncertainty that weighed on her young heart. Do you think they'll find us? Lily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Evelyn hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I think they're already watching us, she admitted. But I also think they're afraid of what we might find. That's why they're following us. They don't want us to know the truth. Lily nodded, a fierce determination lighting up her eyes. Then we have to keep going, she said. We have to find out everything from Mom. Evelyn felt a surge of pride, of love for this brave, resilient child who had faced so much and yet refused to give up. She wrapped her arms around Lily, holding her close, feeling the strength that they shared, the bond that no one could take from them. As they lay in the dark, Evelyn's mind raced with plans, with questions, with the knowledge that they were nearing the heart of the mystery. She didn't know who these people were, or why they had taken such lengths to keep her and Amelia apart. But she knew one thing for certain. They had underestimated her, underestimated the strength of the family's love, of a sister's promise. And as the hours passed, as they lay awake in the quiet darkness, Evelyn felt a fierce determination settle within her. She would find the answers, no matter the cost. She would uncover the truth for Amelia, for Lily, for herself. And when she finally confronted the people who had stolen her family's future, she would make sure they knew that their time of hiding, of controlling their lives, was over. The stakes were higher than ever, the danger closer than she had ever imagined. But Evelyn knew one thing for certain. She was ready to face whatever came next. She was ready to fight for her family, for the life they should have had together. And as the first light of dawn crept through the window, she knew that the climax of their story was drawing near, that the truth lay just beyond her reach, waiting for her to uncover it. As dawn's light crept through the curtains, Evelyn felt a new surge of resolve. Today, she would dig deeper. She'd search every place her sister had once known, speak to anyone who remembered Amelia, and leave no stone unturned. She glanced over at Lily, who was still sleeping peacefully, a small hand clutching Amelia's journal as if it were a lifeline. Evelyn couldn't help but feel a fierce protectiveness over her niece, over the family she hadn't known she'd had until days ago. After a quick breakfast, Evelyn and Lily set out, determined to find answers. They visited more places from Amelia's past, trying to piece together what had happened and why her life had been haunted by strangers and shadows. But each conversation left Evelyn more disturbed than the last. The people they met spoke of Amelia as a quiet, haunted woman, someone who seemed burdened by a secret she could never share. They described how she'd often looked over her shoulder, her expression guarded, her trust hard to earn. In the afternoon, Evelyn and Lily returned to a small library on the edge of town where Amelia had once spent hours reading. Evelyn had hoped to find some record, some document Amelia might have left behind. But as they browsed through the quiet aisles, Evelyn sensed a shift in the air. A prickling sensation at the back of her neck warned her they were no longer alone. At the far end of the library, a figure in a grey coat appeared, the same man who had watched them from across the street. His eyes followed their every move, cold and unblinking. Evelyn's heart raced, and she instinctively drew Lily closer, her mind spinning with fear. She knew they needed to leave, but something inside her rebelled against running. She was tired of hiding, tired of being watched. It was time for answers. Forcing herself to stay calm, Evelyn led Lily to the reading area, where she could sit quietly within sight. She approached the man, determined to confront him, her voice firm as she spoke. "Why are you following us?" The man gave a cold, detached smile, his eyes narrowing as he regarded her. "I think you know why," he replied smoothly, his voice low. "Your sister knew her place. She understood the consequences of pushing too far. I suggest you do the same." Evelyn felt a surge of anger. "My sister never gave up on finding me," she shot back, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. "She knew what was done to us wasn't right, and I'm not going to stop until I know the truth." The man's expression shifted slightly, his smile fading as a hint of irritation crossed his face. "Truth," he echoed, as if the very word amused him. "There are things you'd be better off not knowing. Amelia tried to warn you of that. She went to great lengths to protect you both, until she realized it was futile." Evelyn's heart pounded at his words, the implication hanging heavily in the air. She could feel her hands shaking, but she held his gaze, refusing to back down. "What do you mean, futile? What did she find out?" The man leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "There are some secrets that stay buried for a reason. Your sister thought she could outrun her past, but it's always been here waiting. The only mistake she made was thinking she could change things. Evelyn's stomach twisted as she listened, a horrible suspicion forming in her mind. She had always assumed that her separation from Amelia had been the result of tragic circumstances, of well-meaning people who believed they were doing the right thing. But now she felt certain that there was more, something deliberate, something sinister. Someone had wanted them apart, and they had succeeded. Before she could question the man further, he stepped back, his expression once again a mask of calm indifference. "I suggest you take your niece and leave Willowbrook. Some stories are best left unfinished." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Evelyn stunned and trembling, her mind racing with questions. She watched him leave, her heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that she had just glimpsed a much darker truth than she'd ever anticipated. When she returned to Lully's side, the girl looked up at her with wide, questioning eyes. "Who was that man?" Lily whispered, her voice filled with fear. Evelyn hesitated, not wanting to scare her niece, but knowing that she couldn't hide the truth any longer. "Someone who doesn't want us to know the whole story," she replied softly. "But we're not going to let them stop us." Back at the motel that night, Evelyn and Lily pored over Amelia's journal again, searching for any clue that might explain who these people were and why they had gone to such lengths to keep Amelia away from her family. Near the end of the journal, they found a passage that sent chills down Evelyn's spine. "They've told me I need to stop looking, to let her go. But I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. I know she's out there somewhere, waiting for me. They think they can scare me into silence, that I'll just disappear like they want me to. But I won't. I'll keep fighting until they have no choice but to listen. I'll find her, no matter what it costs me." The words were haunting, filled with the desperation Evelyn could feel in her own heart. She realized that Amelia had spent her life fighting against forces she hadn't understood, forces that had manipulated and controlled her, just as they were now trying to control Evelyn and Lily. But even as fear settled over her, she felt a fierce determination rise within her. She wasn't going to let them win. The following day, Evelyn took Lily to a small storage facility where Amelia had kept some personal belongings in her final years. After speaking with the attendant, they were led to a dusty unit filled with old boxes and files. Among the papers, Evelyn found a series of letters, some addressed to herself, others written in a handwriting she didn't recognize. The letters described in detail how Amelia had uncovered evidence of an organization, an agency hidden in plain sight, that had operated in the shadows, monitoring families, separating siblings, all under the guise of protection. Evelyn's hands shook as she read the letters, each one painting a darker picture of the people who had stolen her family. They had manipulated records, fabricated stories, and forced families apart, all for reasons Evelyn couldn't comprehend. The last letter, written just weeks before Amelia's death, contained a single line that filled Evelyn with dread. "They've warned me to stop searching. But I know the truth, and I won't let them bury it. They're watching, waiting for me to disappear, but I won't go quietly." As she read those words, Evelyn felt a surge of anger and heartbreak. Amelia had known that her life was in danger, yet she had continued searching, refusing to let them control her. And now, Evelyn felt certain that these same people were watching her, waiting for her to give up, to let go of the truth. But she wouldn't. She had come too far, and she would honor her sister's courage by seeing this through to the end. As they left the storage unit, Evelyn could feel eyes on her, the weight of unseen watchers pressing down. But she straightened her shoulders, her heart set. They could watch her all they wanted. She was done running. Whatever lay ahead, whatever dangers still waited in the shadows, she would face them head on. Back in the car, Lily looked up at her young eyes filled with both fear and hope. "Are we going to be okay, Aunt Evelyn?" she asked quietly. Evelyn took a deep breath, reaching out to take her niece's hand. "I don't know, sweetheart," she replied honestly. "But I promise you, we're not alone. We have each other, and we have your mom's strength with us. No matter what happens, we're going to keep fighting. For her, for us." Lily nodded, her face determined, a small hand clutching Evelyn's tightly. They both knew that the road ahead was dark and filled with dangers they couldn't fully understand. But they also knew that they had come too far to turn back now. And as they drove into the night, Evelyn felt a fierce resolve settle within her, a promise to her sister that she would not rest until the truth was finally uncovered. The climax was near, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down. She knew that, one way or another, the truth would come to light, and that she and Lily would face it together, whatever it cost. As Evelyn and Lily drove through the dimly lit streets, the air felt thick with anticipation. It had one final lead, a name mentioned in one of Amelia's letters. A man named Mr. Harlan, a former government official Amelia had sought out in her desperate search for the truth. According to the letters, he was the last person Amelia had confided in before everything fell apart. If anyone could give them answers, it would be him. They arrived at a quiet house at the edge of town, surrounded by trees that seemed to press in, making the place feel isolated and forgotten. Evelyn's heart raced as she approached the door, Lily close by her side, clutching her hand tightly. She knocked, and after a few moments, an elderly man opened the door. His eyes were sharp, taking in both Evelyn and Lily with a guarded expression. But when Evelyn mentioned Amelia's name, a look of recognition, and something like sorrow, crossed his face. He gestured for them to come inside, leading them to a modest living room lined with dusty bookshelves and faded photographs. Evelyn noticed a slight tremor in his hands as he sat down, his gaze shifting between her and Lily with an expression that was both wary and resigned. "I've been expecting you," Mr. Harlan said quietly, his voice roughened by age and something darker, perhaps regret. "Amelia came to me years ago looking for answers. She never found them, but I think she knew she wouldn't leave this fight alive." Evelyn's chest tightened at his words, the weight of Amelia's struggle pressing down on her. "We need to know what happened to her," she said, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her. "Why was she being followed? Why did they separate us?" Mr. Harlan sighed, his gaze dropping to his hands. It was all part of a project, a secret program that should have been shut down decades ago. He paused, as if trying to gather the strength to continue. "Your family was chosen, Evelyn. I don't know all the details, but I know that they thought. They thought they could manipulate lives, control families for reasons they believed were for the greater good." Evelyn felt a chill as his words sank in. The idea that her family had been targeted, that people had deliberately torn them apart, made her stomach turn. "For the greater good," she echoed, her voice filled with disbelief. What could possibly justify tearing a family apart? Mr. Harlan shook his head. "It was a misguided project, Evelyn. They believed that by controlling certain families, separating siblings, they could create resilience, independence. They wanted to experiment with how people would grow under different circumstances. They wanted to see if separation could strengthen bonds in some twisted way." Lily's hand tightened around Evelyn's, her young face pale as she listened. Evelyn could feel her own anger rising, a slow burn of rage at the injustice her sister had endured, the life they had both lost because of this twisted experiment. "And my sister?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "What happened to her?" Mr. Harlan's expression darkened. Amelia knew too much. She threatened to go public with what she had learned, to expose the people behind the project. They'd warned her, but she wouldn't back down. She was brave, but they decided she was a liability. Evelyn's heart sank, understanding all too well what that meant. Amelia had sacrificed everything to protect her, to shield her from a truth that had ultimately cost her life. She swallowed hard, fighting back tears as she looked at Mr. Harlan. "But why are they still following us?" she asked. "Why now?" The old man hesitated, his gaze flickering to Lily. "Because Amelia left something behind, something that they're still afraid of. She kept records, proof of the project's existence, evidence that could ruin the lives of powerful people. And they know that if you find it, if you expose them, their secrets will be revealed." Evelyn's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle finally snapping into place. Amelia hadn't just been fighting to find her sister. She had been fighting to bring down the people who had torn them apart. And she had left a trail, a hidden path that Evelyn and Lily had unknowingly followed. "Where is it?" Evelyn demanded, her voice filled with determination. Where did she hide this proof? Mr. Harlan looked away, his expression pained. "She told me that if anything ever happened to her, you would know where to look," she said. She said it was in a place only you two would remember. Evelyn felt her breath catch. She thought back to the few memories she had of her sister, memories faded by time, but still vivid in her heart. And then she knew. There had been a place, a small, abandoned cabin at the edge of Willowbrook, a place where she and Amelia had played as children. It was the one place they had felt safe, hidden from the world. Without another word, Evelyn took Lully's hand, nodding in silent understanding. They left Mr. Harlan's house, his words echoing in her mind as they made their way to the cabin. She knew that if they found what Amelia had hidden, everything would change. But she also knew that it was their only hope of finding justice for her sister. As they approached the cabin, Evelyn's heart pounded with a mixture of hope and fear. She and Lily pushed open the door, dust swirling in the dim light. The place was just as she remembered, untouched by time, a quiet sanctuary hidden away from the world. Together, they searched the small cabin, going through old boxes and lifting loose floorboards. Finally, under a stack of old blankets in the corner, they found it. A small metal box covered in dust. Evelyn opened it with trembling hands, her breath catching as she saw what was inside. Letters, documents, photographs, proof of the project, evidence of the experiments, and the names of everyone involved. But as she read through the papers, her heart froze. There was one name that made everything fall into place. A name that sent a chill down her spine. Her own adoptive parents. The realization hit her like a wave. Her adoptive parents had known her all along. They had been part of the project, part of the plan to separate her and Amelia. They had raised her, loved her, all while keeping the truth hidden from her. She felt a deep, twisting betrayal, a wound that cut to her very core. Everything she thought she knew about her past, about her family, was a lie. Evelyn slumped back, her mind reeling. Lily looked up at her, confusion and concern in her young eyes. "Aunt Evelyn, what's wrong?" Evelyn struggled to find her voice. They knew, Lily. The people who adopted me, they were part of this. They knew what they'd done to me, to my sister. They raised me, with this secret hanging over us all. Lily's eyes widened, a small hand reaching out to grasp Evelyn's tightly. But you found out? You found out the truth, and that's what matters now. We're here, and we know. Evelyn nodded, pulling Lily close. She felt the sting of betrayal, but she also felt a fierce, unbreakable strength within her. Amelia had given her this final gift, the truth, and now Evelyn knew what she had to do. In the days that followed, Evelyn brought the documents to a trusted reporter, someone outside the system, someone who would ensure that the truth came to light. The story spread, exposing the hidden project, the lies it had destroyed, the people who had been complicit. The agency was dismantled. Evelyn knew that Amelia's battle had finally been won. But the pain of betrayal lingered. She never spoke to her adoptive parents again, unable to forgive the role they had played in keeping her from her sister. Yet she found peace in the knowledge that she and Lily had honored Amelia's memory, that they had fought for justice and won. One night, as Evelyn sat by the fire with Lily, she felt a strange, bittersweet calm settle over her. They had walked through shadows, uncovered secrets, and faced the ghosts of the past. And in the end, they had emerged together, their bond unbreakable. As they sat in silence, Evelyn felt a warmth, an inexplicable presence settle around them, as though Amelia were there, watching over them, her spirit finally at peace. And Evelyn knew that she was no longer alone, that her family's story had finally found its ending, one that was both painful and triumphant. In that quiet moment, Evelyn whispered a promise to her sister, one she knew she would keep for the rest of her days. We're together now, Amelia, and no one can ever take that from us again.